I still remember the first time Sarah said it. I can hear the words in my head even now, soft but cutting, like a thin blade sliding through paper. He's below my level. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The way she said it made it worse. Casual, almost amused, like she was sharing a secret truth no one else could see. I was sitting there on the edge of the sofa, heart pounding, my fingers clenched in my lap. Henry sat across from her, calm, composed, his hands resting loosely on his knees. He didn't flinch, didn't argue. He didn't need to. His quiet dignity said more than any words could. And even then, I knew that in some way, he was already proving something far greater than what she could ever understand. Sarah's laugh tinkled in the air like broken glass disguised as music. She leaned back, eyes flicking over him like a critic scanning a painting that didn't meet her standards. And in that moment, I hated her. I hated the arrogance that let her speak like that. I hated the blind confidence that made her think she knew what mattered. But more than anything, I felt an ache in my chest because I loved Henry deeply, completely, and I could see clearer than anyone else could how he carried himself. How he listened, how he cared not just for me, but for the world around him. And suddenly, the world felt cruel because it couldn't see what I saw. I wanted to defend him, to fight for him, to make her understand. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I watched, helpless but burning inside, as she listed every way he supposedly fell short. And yet, he didn't react. His patience, his kindness, his steady strength, all of it shone quietly, like a lighthouse cutting through the fog. And then, my father spoke. That quiet, measured voice of his, the one that had shaped my life. My understanding of right and wrong, the one that no one ever ignored. He looked at Henry calmly, without hesitation. He's the only man I respect. The room went silent. Time slowed. And in that moment, I realized everything was about to change. I come from a family where wealth was never a question. My father, Mr. Hunter, built an empire from scratch, billions in his name. Respect in every room he entered, power that few could even imagine. I grew up in a world where luxury was ordinary and expectation was the norm. Mansions, designer clothes, private jets. It was all normal. But even with all that, my father taught me something that money can't buy. Character, integrity, the ability to see value in people beyond what they own or wear. Sarah fit perfectly into that world. She had elegance, ambition, and a charm that made people trust her instantly. People admired her. Men were drawn to her. Women envied her. She had the kind of presence that could turn heads the moment she entered a room. And for a long time, I believed she was my friend. Then there was Henry. Henry didn't belong in that world, at least not on the surface. He grew up with nothing. No silver spoons, no trust funds, no connections to open doors for him. He worked hard, 3 jobs, every single day, just to keep his family afloat. His shoes were worn, his jacket patched, his hands rough from labor. And yet, despite everything, he carried himself with a quiet dignity that I had never seen in anyone else. I met Henry when I was 22. It wasn't glamorous or dramatic. He was delivering a package to my office, a simple errand, and he smiled at me, polite, gentle, like the world hadn't hardened him into cynicism. I remember thinking, there's something different about him. His eyes were steady, warm, and full of attention. He didn't try to impress me with fancy words or show off. He simply listened. And in that listening, I felt seen in a way I never had before. Our relationship grew slowly. We didn't have extravagant dates. We didn't take expensive vacations or dine in Michelin-star restaurants. We walked in parks, cooked together, talked for hours about hopes, dreams, and fears. He asked about my day, really asked, and remembered the small details that no one else ever noticed. His love was simple, patient, and unwavering. Everything Sarah's world could never measure. Sarah, of course, didn't approve. She started subtly, first asking questions disguised as concern. Are you sure he's right for you? He seems too simple for your life. You could do better. At first, I ignored it. I wanted to believe she didn't understand. I wanted to believe she was speaking out of habit, from a place of her own insecurity. But over time, her comments became sharper. Her laughter no longer included him. Her invitations seemed like tests, subtle jabs at his lack of wealth, his background, even his manners. I could feel it every time we were together. The way she would scan the room, eyes landing on Henry with quiet judgment. measuring him like an object that had to fit her standards. Henry never reacted. He never raised his voice or tried to prove himself. He didn't need to. His integrity spoke louder than any argument Sarah could make. He was patient, gentle, strong in a way that didn't demand attention, but inspired it. That strength, quiet as it was, drew me closer to him every day. I remember one night in particular. We were sitting on the balcony of my apartment, the city lights glowing below us. The wind was soft, carrying distant sounds of traffic and life, but nothing mattered except that moment. I turned to him and asked softly, "Do you ever feel out of place? With me, with my family, with the world I come from?" He looked at me, his eyes steady, and smiled that calm, gentle smile. "I don't need their approval," he said. "I have yours. That's enough." It was then that I realized how much I had underestimated him. Not his potential, he had always had that, but his depth, his ability to love fully, without expectation, without pretense. He was grounded in a way that money could never touch, in a way that no amount of social polish could imitate. And that was the problem for Sarah. She didn't see it, couldn't see it. In her world, worth was measured by material success, by power, by status. She could not understand that someone like Henry could be more valuable than anyone she had ever met. She couldn't see that the man she judged as below her level had already passed the test she didn't even know existed. I still remember the day she said it plainly. We were at my father's estate for a dinner. Henry, in his worn jacket and old shoes, looked perfectly out of place. Sarah's eyes narrowed as she leaned toward me and whispered, "Honestly, he's not what you deserve." Her voice was calm, as if stating a fact. I wanted to argue, to defend him fiercely, to shout that she had no right. But I didn't. I stayed silent, holding Henry's hand under the table. His fingers were warm, strong, reassuring. He didn't flinch. He didn't need to. In that moment, I realized that silence could speak louder than words. Henry had something Sarah never would: self-respect, humility, patience, and unwavering love. And that's when I began to understand that this story, our story, was not about wealth, or status, or approval from anyone else. It was about heart. I also began to notice something else. My father had been observing Henry quietly, in ways none of us could fully grasp, inviting him to discussions, asking him questions, testing his patience, his honesty, his character. And Henry, as always, responded with calm integrity. My father's gaze often lingered on him longer than on anyone else in the room. I didn't understand it fully at first, but deep down, I knew my father was recognizing something rare, something Sarah would never notice until it was too late. And that quiet observation by my father would soon become the turning point for all of us. The tension began quietly, almost imperceptibly at first, like a shadow creeping across the floor. Sarah's comments started as whispers, polite questions masked as concern, but they carried the weight of judgment. She would tilt her head, a soft smile playing on her lips, and ask, "Do you really think he fits in with your world? Or are you sure he knows how to handle people like us?" I would smile, nod politely, but inside, a storm was building. Every word she said chipped away at my patience, at my calm. I wanted to tell her, "You don't know him. You don't see him. You have no idea what he's worth." But I didn't. I learned long ago that words spoken in anger rarely heal. They only wound. So I stayed quiet, letting Henry's actions speak louder than Sarah's criticism ever could. Henry, of course, never reacted to her. That was part of his quiet power. He didn't need to defend himself. He carried himself with the dignity of someone who knew his own worth, someone who didn't need validation from the loud or the judgmental. I would watch him sometimes, noticing the way he listened patiently, his voice soft and steady when he spoke, always polite, always sincere. One night, I watched Sarah in the dining room at my father's estate. She was laughing, but it wasn't the kind of laughter that fills a room. It was clipped, precise, rehearsed, the laughter of someone performing for an audience. And the audience was Henry. She leaned closer to me and whispered honestly, "I don't know why you insist on keeping him around. He doesn't belong here." I felt my chest tighten. The words felt heavier than they should have, and yet Henry simply smiled at her, as if her opinion didn't matter at all. That smile, calm and unwavering, was the same smile that had first drawn me to him. And in that moment, I realized something important. He was untouchable. Not because of wealth or power, but because of his integrity. Sarah's disdain didn't stop there. She began making comments more openly, in front of others, subtle jabs at his background, his appearance, his job. "I mean, it's sweet that he tries," she said one afternoon, her voice light, almost joking, but really. "Does he even understand what kind of world he's entering?" She didn't pause to notice the way Henry's jaw tightened ever so slightly, or the way he remained composed, nodding politely. It was during these moments that I realized the true contrast between them. Sarah measured life in wealth and appearances. Henry measured it in patience, in honesty, in how a person treated others. And that measurement, quiet and invisible, made him far stronger than she could ever imagine. I remember a particular evening that still lingers in my memory. We were at my father's mansion for a small dinner. The room smelled of rich wood and fresh flowers, the air tinged with the faint scent of expensive perfume. Sarah leaned toward me, voice soft but sharp, as if sharing a secret. "I just don't think he's enough for you, for your life, for your family." I stayed silent. I wanted to shout, to defend him with every ounce of my being, but instead, I squeezed Henry's hand under the table. He didn't flinch. His presence was steady, reassuring, and in that quiet touch, I felt strength. I felt love. I felt a certainty that Sarah could never understand. But Sarah didn't stop. She began testing him in ways I hadn't anticipated. She asked questions about my father, about my family's business, about our plans for the future. Each question was designed to provoke, to expose a lack of sophistication, a lack of wealth, a lack of something she couldn't define. Henry answered each one calmly, honestly. He didn't pretend to know what he didn't know. He didn't try to impress, and yet every answer was filled with wisdom, patience, and respect. My father, who had been observing quietly from across the room, nodded slightly at one point, almost imperceptibly. And I noticed something then, a quiet respect forming, one that Sarah could not see, could not understand, could not earn through her arrogance or her wealth. One evening after another subtle jab from Sarah, I asked Henry softly, "Does it bother you?" He looked at me, calm and steady, and smiled. "It doesn't matter what she thinks," he said simply. "I know who I am, and I know what matters." Those words were like a balm to my heart, but they also made me realize something frightening. Sarah would never understand. She would never see the value of patience, integrity, humility. She would never understand that wealth isn't the measure of a person, that appearances are fleeting, and that true strength lies in quiet dignity. The tension grew as our wedding approached. Sarah became bolder, more daring in her criticisms. At a family gathering, she leaned toward me and whispered loudly enough for Henry to hear. "You know, I just don't see him fitting into this family, into your life. Are you sure you know what you're doing?" Henry's response was calm, simple, polite. "I know exactly what I'm doing, and I know what I value." It was that quiet assurance that began to shift the room little by little. People started noticing. Even my father, who rarely expressed his thoughts openly, began observing Henry more closely. And Sarah, well, she began to lose her confident composure. There was a day when it all came to a head. We were hosting a small event at my father's estate, just a few close family friends. Sarah, as usual, found a way to make Henry the subject of her quiet judgment. She whispered comments about his shoes, his job, his education, all in that soft, precise tone that made it feel like she was doing me a favor by speaking. Henry remained calm, as always. And then something unexpected happened. One of my father's business associates asked a complicated question about investment strategy, something Sarah assumed Henry wouldn't understand. She leaned toward me, whispering, "See, he can't handle this world." But Henry answered, calmly, clearly, and with insight that even impressed the seasoned businessmen. He spoke not to show off, but to answer honestly and thoughtfully. The room went quiet. People listened. And I realized then that Henry's quiet power was undeniable. He didn't need to shout. He didn't need to flaunt wealth or status. His character spoke louder than Sarah's arrogance ever could. Sarah's face shifted then. I saw the first flicker of doubt. For the first time, she looked unsure, caught off guard by something she hadn't expected. Her usual confidence wavered, just slightly, but it was enough for me to notice. She was seeing a glimpse of what I had always known. Henry was more than she could measure, more than she could understand, more than she could ever be. Still, she didn't give up. Over the following weeks, Sarah tried again and again subtle comments, invitations designed to exclude him, critiques masked as concern. And through it all, Henry remained himself, patient, gentle, strong, unshakable. It was exhausting, watching Sarah's slow attempts to undermine him. And yet, through that exhaustion, I felt something else growing inside me. Pride in Henry. Pride in the quiet, steadfast love he offered me every day. Pride in the integrity he carried, unshaken by judgment, unbroken by wealth or status. Henry's strength wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't something Sarah could see or appreciate, but I saw it. My father saw it. And soon, the world would have to see it too, in its own time, in its own quiet way, when words were no longer necessary. There was one night, particularly, when I realized how much the tension had grown. We were at my father's mansion, a casual dinner with a few close family friends. Sarah leaned over, voice sweet but dripping with condescension. "Honestly, Henry, sometimes I wonder if you even belong here." In this world, Henry didn't flinch. He didn't raise his voice. He simply nodded, smiled, and responded with calm respect. My father watched, quiet as always, and I felt a shift in the air. I didn't understand it fully then, but I could sense that Henry's quiet integrity had already begun to pierce the veneer of status and judgment. Sarah clung to so desperately. That night, I held Henry's hand under the table. He didn't need to speak. I didn't need to speak. The tension, the judgment, the unspoken words, they all dissolved in the quiet certainty of what truly mattered. And for the first time, I understood that Sarah's disdain was powerless against the kind of strength Henry carried, the kind that can't be measured in money, appearances, or social standing. It was the beginning of a slow, inevitable revelation, the kind that would change everything. It happened quietly, without fanfare, yet the moment would change everything. I remember it clearly, the smell of polished wood, the faint scent of fresh flowers in my father's study, the muted sunlight filtering through the tall windows. Henry and I had been invited to the estate, under the pretense of a casual afternoon tea. But I sensed something was different that day. My father's gaze was steady, unreadable, as though he already knew what was about to unfold. Henry, as always, remained calm. He didn't fidget. He didn't try to impress. He simply adjusted his sleeves, sat upright, and waited. There was an unspoken confidence in him that made the room feel still, as if the world had slowed just to watch him. My father motioned for us to sit. He poured tea with deliberate care, his movements precise, controlled. Then he looked at Henry, his dark eyes steady, thoughtful, and said softly, "Henry, I've been watching you." Henry inclined his head politely. "Yes, sir." His voice was even respectful, unhurried. My father leaned back in his chair, studying him carefully. "You understand what I mean, don't you?" "That I observe, that I notice how people behave when no one else is looking." Henry nodded. "Yes, sir. I understand." There was a pause, a quiet moment, that felt like the turning of a tide. I held my breath, unsure what would come next, knowing that this moment could change everything one way or another. Then my father spoke again, his voice calm, but carrying weight, authority, and something deeper. "Henry, in all my years, I have met many men. I have observed their wealth, their power, their influence, but rarely have I met a man like you." I felt my chest tighten. Rarely had my father ever praised anyone so openly, and even then, his words were measured, deliberate, not given lightly. I glanced at Henry. He didn't smile, didn't look proud. He simply listened, as he always did, steady and patient. My father's eyes softened slightly, though the intensity remained. "You have patience, integrity. You do not seek approval from the loud or the boastful. You carry yourself with dignity, humility, and strength. You understand the value of honesty and respect, qualities that are far more important than wealth or titles." Henry's hands rested calmly on the table. He said nothing, but I saw the faintest glimmer of emotion in his eyes. Not arrogance, not pride, but quiet acknowledgement, as if he understood the gravity of the words without needing to react. My father leaned forward slightly, voice dropping to a near whisper, as though sharing a secret with the universe itself. "Henry, you are the only man I respect. Truly respect. And anyone who cannot see that, anyone who judges you for what you lack materially, does not understand the measure of a person." Time seemed to pause. I felt it, a stillness that made the walls of the room feel sacred. I looked at Henry, and for the first time I noticed the way his shoulders relaxed slightly. He didn't need to speak. My father's words alone were enough. Later, I would learn that my father had been testing Henry all along, inviting him to discussions about business strategy, observing how he treated others in moments of pressure, seeing if he would compromise his values for approval or gain. And through it all, Henry had passed every test without even knowing it. His integrity had been silent, his patience unspoken, yet undeniable. The truth of it struck me deeply. Sarah's judgment, her whispered criticisms, her casual disdain, all of it had been based on assumptions, appearances, and her own limited measure of worth. She had never seen Henry for who he truly was, and perhaps she never could. I remember when Sarah found out later. She came to me, her expression a mixture of shock, disbelief, and frustration. How could he? She stammered, unable to form a coherent thought. How could he be respected like that? I didn't answer. I simply let the silence speak. There was no need to gloat, no need to explain. The truth was clear, undeniable, and it needed no embellishment. Henry didn't gloat either. He never did. He simply returned to his quiet demeanor, the same calm, gentle man I had fallen in love with. The man whose strength was invisible to those who valued wealth and appearances over character. He didn't need validation. He didn't seek recognition. He lived by principles. And now those principles had been quietly acknowledged by the man whose respect meant the most. After that day, everything shifted. Sarah's confidence faltered. She tried, subtly at first, to maintain her composure, to act as though nothing had changed. But I could see it in her eyes, the first flicker of doubt. The realization that her judgment had been flawed, that her measure of worth had been blind to what truly mattered. Henry and I returned home that evening, quiet. The city lights blinked softly below, distant and indifferent. I reached for his hand, and he took it, warm and steady. I didn't need to speak. The air between us was full of unspoken understanding. My heart was full, my mind clear. I realized in that moment that the trials we had faced, the judgment, the whispers, the subtle disdain, had all led to this quiet triumph. Henry had never sought it. He had never needed it. Yet, by simply being himself, by staying true to his values and his love for me, he had proven far more than words or wealth ever could. And I began to understand something essential. The world Sarah had judged Henry by, the world of money, status, and appearances, was a false measure. True worth was something deeper, quieter, more enduring. It was patience when tested, kindness when unobserved, honesty when lying would be easier. It was the courage to love without expectation, and the humility to know your own value without seeking approval. I still remember sitting in my father's study long after Henry and I left. The sunlight had faded, shadows stretching across the walls, the air calm and still. I thought of Sarah, of her words, her judgments, her inability to see what was right in front of her. And I felt no anger, only pity. Pity for a person who measured life by superficialities, who could not grasp the quiet strength of a man who had already won in every way that mattered. And yet, I also felt a quiet sense of triumph, not for myself, not for Henry, but for the truth. The truth that integrity, patience, and love, quiet, steadfast love, are worth more than all the wealth in the world. That recognition, once earned, cannot be taken away. It cannot be bought, manipulated, or forced. It simply is. I think back often to that afternoon, to the stillness of the study, to the weight of my father's words. He's the only man I respect. Those 6 words carried more power than any fortune, more weight than any title, more significance than any society or hierarchy. They were the acknowledgement of everything Henry had always been, patient, kind, honest, and unwavering. In that turning point, everything changed. Not with drama or confrontation, but with quiet revelation. The world, or at least the part of it that mattered to us, had shifted. Respect had been given where it was deserved. Judgment had been exposed as ignorance. And love, the kind of love that is patient, quiet, and enduring, had been vindicated without a single raised voice. That day marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. It was the day the truth became undeniable. The day Henry's worth could no longer be questioned, and the day Sarah's shallow measures of value finally failed. And in the quiet aftermath, I understood something profound. The strongest victories are often silent. They do not require noise or spectacle. They require patience, integrity, and the courage to remain true when the world doubts you. And in Henry, I saw all of that, quietly, undeniably, forever. After that afternoon in my father's study, life didn't explode. There were no grand confrontations, no shouting matches, no dramatic showdowns. Everything changed quietly, subtly, in ways that only time could reveal. Sarah didn't storm out screaming. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She simply faded. Her presence became less frequent, her voice less sharp. It was as if the world she had tried to control had quietly taken a turn she could no longer influence. Henry and I returned to our dailylife.com, and steady as ever. The city outside moved at its usual frantic pace, but within the walls of our home, there was a sense of peace I had never experienced before. Henry didn't brag. He didn't flaunt the recognition my father had given him. He simply continued being the man I had fallen in love with, patient, kind, and unwaveringly strong. I remember one evening sitting on the balcony with him, the sun setting behind the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink. I held his hand, fingers intertwined, and I felt the quiet weight of everything that had happened. "You know," I said softly, "everything changed that day. You changed everything." Without even trying. He smiled gently, eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "I didn't change anything," he replied. "I was just myself. That's all anyone can ever be." It struck me then how rare that is to be oneself fully, without pretense, without fear of judgment, to live honestly, patiently, and with integrity. That was Henry. That was what made him more valuable than anyone Sarah had ever known or could ever hope to be. Sarah, of course, tried to reach out once or twice after that. A message here, a forced smile there, attempts to insert herself back into our lives. But it was clear she no longer fit. Not because we excluded her, but because the world she tried to command no longer recognized her authority. She had measured worth by wealth and status, and in the quiet aftermath of truth, those measures held no power. I watched her realize finally that Henry's worth could not be questioned, that his integrity was unshakable, and that the love between him and me was not something she could influence or diminish. I felt no joy in her disappointment, only pity. Pity for someone who could not see beyond superficiality to the strength that matters most. Life with Henry settled into a rhythm I had always secretly hoped for. We moved into a modest home, not a mansion, not a palace, just a place filled with warmth, laughter, and love. There were no extravagances, no displays of wealth, but every corner of that home carried the proof of who we were, who we chose to be together. I began to notice the small things more deeply. The way Henry would wake early just to make me coffee. The way he listened when I spoke, truly listened, remembering details I had forgotten myself. The quiet way he offered help to neighbors, strangers, and friends. The patience he carried in every action, in every word, in every gesture. My father's recognition of him became a quiet backdrop to our life. He never needed to repeat it, never needed to remind anyone, but it was there, always. A silent acknowledgement that Henry's strength and character could not be denied. And that, I realized, was more powerful than anything money could buy. There were moments, rare but profound, when Sarah would cross paths with us in social settings. She would attempt a polite smile, a casual greeting, but it always felt hollow. She had measured worth incorrectly, judged hastily, and the truth had quietly, irrevocably, proven her wrong. And yet, Henry never gloated. He never needed to. His life, lived with integrity and love, was proof enough. I learned then that silence can be the most potent form of victory. There is no need for confrontation, no need for words to crush arrogance. Sometimes quiet strength, consistency, and unwavering integrity speak louder than any argument ever could. Henry embodied that truth. Our love grew deeper with every passing day. We faced challenges. Of course, life never offers only ease, but every difficulty became an opportunity to practice patience, empathy, and understanding. And through it all, we discovered the real richness of life: connection, trust, respect, and love that is not measured by wealth or status, but by heart and character. I often reflect on the contrast between Henry and Sarah. Sarah had ambition, beauty, charm, everything that the world often equates with success. But Henry had something rarer, something deeper. moral strength, patience, kindness, and the courage to be himself in a world that constantly judged him. That is the kind of value that endures. That is the kind of strength that shapes lives quietly, irrevocably, and beautifully. There were days when I felt a quiet satisfaction, a serene sense of justice in the world. Not revenge, not cruelty, but the gentle certainty that the truth had revealed itself in the most natural, inevitable way. Sarah had judged wrongly, and life had corrected her. Henry had never needed to fight for recognition. He had lived rightly, patiently, honestly, and in the end, that was enough. I also realized how my father had guided everything subtly, without interfering. He had tested Henry, observed him, and waited. And when the moment came, he had acknowledged the truth in a way that no one could refute. It was a quiet lesson. Power is not in wealth, but in insight. Respect is earned through integrity. And love, the kind that is patient, steady, and genuine, is beyond all measure. Our life continued like that, steady, peaceful, and full of small joys. Sunday mornings, with coffee and toast. Evening walks along the quiet streets, the occasional dinner with my father, who watched Henry with a subtle smile of approval, a quiet acknowledgement of everything that mattered. Sarah eventually disappeared from our lives entirely, not through drama or argument, but simply because she had no role to play in a story she couldn't understand. She had judged incorrectly, measured falsely, and the truth left no space for her influence. Henry never gloated. I never needed to boast. And yet, the quiet victory was complete. The love we shared, the life we built, and the respect we had earned was more valuable than any fortune, more meaningful than any title, more permanent than any wealth. I would sometimes sit on the balcony at night, Henry beside me, and think about all that had passed. About Sarah, about my father, about the world that so often measures worth incorrectly. And I would feel a deep, calm peace. Not triumph in the way the world recognizes, but triumph in the way that matters. Integrity preserved, love honored, and life lived rightly. And in that quiet reflection, I realized the truth I had been learning all along. Life's richest victories are silent. They do not need applause, recognition, or validation. They are carried quietly, persistently, and beautifully in the hearts of those who live with honesty, patience, and love. Henry had shown me that he had lived it, and in living it, he had taught me, and even my father, the most important lesson of all: the strongest hearts, the deepest love, and the greatest victories are never measured in money, appearances, or approval. They are measured in character, patience, and the courage to be unwaveringly true. That is the life we built together. Quiet, steady, strong, full of love, and far more valuable than anything the world could ever measure. Years have passed since those quiet battles and subtle victories. Life with Henry has been steady, gentle, and full of the kind of love that can't be measured by wealth, appearances, or approval. We built a home together, not extravagant, not flashy, but warm and filled with laughter, trust, and understanding. Every corner of it carries reminders of patience, honesty, and quiet devotion. I often think back to Sarah, and I do not feel anger or bitterness, only a quiet understanding of the lessons life teaches when we measure people correctly. She judged wrongly, valuing wealth and status over character and heart, and in doing so, she revealed more about herself than she ever could about Henry. Her world could not contain the kind of strength he carried, the kind that does not shout, does not demand recognition, and does not bend to superficial measures. Henry's integrity remains unwavering. He does not flaunt his victories, nor does he seek admiration. He lives fully in each small moment of life, making tea, listening carefully, walking quietly beside me in silence that speaks volumes. In him, I have learned that the most profound love is patient, quiet, and enduring. It does not need to announce itself, it simply is. My father, Mr. Hunter, continues to watch, silently approving, never needing to voice it loudly. He sees in Henry the rare qualities that cannot be bought: respect, patience, honesty, and the courage to stand firm in one's values. I understand now that his recognition was never for show, but a testament to the truth. Henry's worth was never in doubt, only in waiting to be acknowledged by those who truly understand what matters. I often recall that afternoon in my father's study when he said, softly but firmly, He's the only man I respect. Those words shaped more than our lives. They shaped the understanding of what truly matters in a world obsessed with appearances. That day marked not just a turning point, but a revelation. Integrity, patience, and quiet strength can triumph over arrogance, judgment, and shallow measures of success. And so, life continues, steady and calm. Henry and I face challenges, as all couples do, but the weight of judgment and the shadows of misunderstanding no longer touch us. We live in a world we have shaped with love, honesty, and shared values, a world that is far richer than any fortune could provide. Sometimes, in the quiet moments, I whisper to myself the truth I have learned. Wealth can measure many things, but it can never measure character. Status can grant recognition, but it cannot earn respect. And love, the kind that is patient, enduring, and true, is priceless. In the end, I realize that the greatest victories are those lived quietly, without fanfare, without need for acknowledgement. The triumphs of patience, honesty, and enduring love are invisible to many, but they are the most profound of all. Henry taught me that. My father recognized it, and in that recognition, I have found peace, joy, and the kind of love that transforms life itself. We are not rich in gold or possessions, but we are rich in trust, in integrity, and in a love that no judgment or arrogance can ever diminish. And sometimes, when I look at Henry, quiet and steady beside me, I feel the weight of all we have endured and the beauty of a life lived with heart, patience, and truth. And so, I whisper this lesson to anyone who might listen, softly, as though beside a warm fire on a quiet night. In the end, wealth can't measure the worth of love.